3.5 years after the release of Breath of the Wild, this just dropped out of nowhere. What's up guys, MaskedNintendoBandit here, and I'm going to contain my hype long enough for us to actually break this down and talk about it. We're going to cover some questions at the end, so be sure to stay tuned until after I break down the trailer. So it starts out with this familiar fade into the tapestry cutscene, but it looks like it's been beautifully re-rendered. As far as I can tell, this is not a re-recording of these lines from Impa's voice actor. It sounds the exact same, so this is most likely just a re-rendering of this legend, probably to the opening of the game. And speaking of re-renderings, there are also just completely new animations and settings. Looks like they spared no expense for the creation of 100 years ago Hyrule. Everything looks gorgeous and very true to the original, but it just really captures just the horror of what happened 100 years ago when all of the Sheikah constructs were turned evil by Calamity Ganon and they assaulted Hyrule. This is going to be before any of those events, as evidenced here by this little time skip. Obviously, we see the gorgeous Hyrule Castle that just looks really quite spectacular in all of its old glory. And we also see a bunch of birds flying through the air. Now, these birds are actually pretty large from what I can tell. So my first instinct is thinking, either these are Rito or Loftwings. If they were Loftwings, that would be super cool because we have not ever seen live Loftwings outside of Skyward Sword, and Breath of the Wild did have a whole bunch of connections to Skyward Sword. Although I'm not sure how they would have gone extinct, but maybe we'll get more of that in the game. Next up, we have a pretty good shot of Link raising his sword in allegiance, most likely to the King of Hyrule, or maybe even Princess Zelda. But one thing to note here is that this is before he was chosen as a champion, I'm assuming, because he's not wearing his champion garb and he doesn't have the Master Sword yet, but yet he is in the Hylian soldier gear. And because we do see Link with the Master Sword later on in the trailer, this is going to cover how he initially found the Master Sword, which is super exciting. Then we have a shot of Zelda just walking in the castle, you know, being Zelda, and then we have this glory shot of warfare in this new Hyrule Warriors game. If you're familiar with Hyrule Warriors, you know that there's a lot of foot soldiers, a lot of enemies covering all of the ground, but seeing that in the familiar territory of Breath of the Wild's Hyrule is just really special, especially because we can pick up on some of the bigger weapons that probably both sides will be using against each other, like the Hylian cannons and potentially enemy catapults, but more on that later. We then see Zelda and Mipha discussing the Sheikah Slate, which is pretty important because this means that Zelda has a Sheikah Slate, and the reason why that's important I'll get into in just a second. Here we can see what can only be assumed to be Link and Revali sparring off, which given Revali's character is probably pretty typical. I'm assuming he's the one who challenges Link in this scenario, but it also looks like he actually gets the better of Link, which is something that you wouldn't assume to have happened given what we see in the original game. Either way, this scene is super interesting, and I'm not sure if maybe Link activates like his slow motion ability and maybe turns around and gets out of this or what, but either way, it does look like Revali has a one-up on Link here. It is definitely possible that they're actually just fighting a different enemy, but I don't think that's the more likely scenario because it looks like Revali is dodging Link's strike pretty clearly. Then of course we have a shot of Ganon's army approaching the castle, and this is the part that is pretty interesting to me. We see that as part of Link's moveset, he throws a bomb. Now this makes sense since it's Breath of the Wild Link, and in the previous Hyrule Warriors games, they definitely pull in weapons and characters from all over the place and just kind of smash them all in the same game. I mean, even Link's spinner from Twilight Princess is a weapon. But in this case, because we're not sure if this game is canon yet, Link can't use that kind of weaponry without a Sheikah Slate. That bomb is Sheikah technology, but Zelda has the Sheikah Slate. Could this mean that there are actually multiple, or at least there used to be? Then we have a shot of the King of Hyrule bolstering his forces into battle, and immediately after that, we see the mechanics of those giant weird Sheikah pillar things that surround the castle. I mean, you wouldn't have guessed, but it looks like guardians actually pop out of the orifices, I guess, in the sides of these things, which kind of begs a few questions and maybe even gives a few answers about the mechanics of these giant storage devices. I mean, are they filled completely with ancient energy? It would kind of seem so given what we see here. Or does it literally create guardians? Definitely an interesting little tidbit to see and show in a trailer. And then we see what can only be assumed to be Link's knighthood, or rather his choosing of being Zelda's appointed knight. Because again, he doesn't yet have his champion garb on, but yet this is definitely a special environment here. Zelda seems to be presenting Link and even Impa. At least I assume that's Impa kneeling by him. Looks like she used to be be a little bit taller. This is probably just when Zelda was appointing both of these people to work with her personally, one as her knight and one as her chief scientist. We then see some shots of Hylian cannon fire, most likely from right around the castle, some stall enemies rising from the ground in response to Calamity Ganon's power, a Lionel being a Lionel. Oh, and again, as part of Zelda's moveset, she can also use like the time pause ability from the Sheikah Slate, meaning both Link and Zelda have Sheikah Slates in this. We see Mipha being pretty awesome, using that trident in battle, which is something I've always wanted to see personally, and a Yiga invasion of Gerudo Town. This is something that wasn't mentioned at all that I can remember in the original Breath of the Wild. The Yiga hideout is also in the Gerudo Desert area, but I'm not sure why they would attack Gerudo Town. We know that eventually they go on to steal their helmet, and Link has to get it back, but this was far before then. We have a pretty fantastic glory shot of all the champions, which I will admit is some pretty great wallpaper material, and a shot of Rudania, the Divine Beast. We will most likely be seeing the fall of the Divine Beasts in this game, and that means we would probably be seeing the deaths of the champions as well. We see a Bokoblin just completely waste this Zora Knight, and to be honest with you, I never realized Bokoblins were that big. A little tidbit of Darunia's moveset, which looks really cool. Same thing with Rivali, looks like he's got some spray fire. And then this scene happens very quickly in classic Breath of the Wild teaser trailer style. And what this looks like to me is Link blocking an attack from some sort of lightning weapon. He already has his champion's garb and the Master Sword, which does prove that we're going to see his gaining of the Master Sword in this game. But judging from the type of weapon used and the angle that the weapon's coming down at him from, and the fact that it looks like a lightning blade, I'm assuming he's battling a Lionel, since they're known to use lightning weaponry sometimes, and I can only assume it's coming from way above his head. And it looks like he actually parried this attack, which is pretty cool. And then we see very quick snippets back to back of the champions either getting hurt, being surprised, or narrowly dodging an attack. This is probably what I can only assume to be their deaths. Then we see an explosion happen on a wall in front of Link and Zelda, on what can only be assumed to be the day of Calamity Ganon's rebirth. The fact that there was an explosion in front of them but then they turn around means it was probably shot at them from catapult fire, most likely from the Moblins. In the distance we can see Hyrule Castletown, meaning this is an assault on the gates itself. We can also see the very metallic gates from Breath of the Wild, and then we see the very familiar scene of Calamity Ganon roaring in the face of the Blood Moon. But after the logo we get one more little shot. We get to see Zelda using her power in a place that we haven't seen in the original game. It looks like she's indoors with what looks like stone walls around her, but she's also in the goddess dress. Since she's already crying and nobody else is around her and she's using her power, this can only mean one thing. This is Zelda holding off against Calamity Ganon in the castle. This is the final moment before the 100-year time lapse. The final moment of the game. And after that we get the release date, which is November 20th, which is pretty soon. Also in the wallpaper art that pops up after that, there's some sort of little cute baby guardian type thing that I can only imagine how we're going to be able to meet and even use in the game, so I'm really excited about this. Okay guys, that was the breakdown, so now let's talk about a few things. First and foremost, the glaring question, is this game going to be canon? Well, as Aonuma stated before the trailer hit, he specifically asked the creators of Hyrule Warriors to make the story of 100 years ago. My first instinct is to say that since this was directly asked from Aonuma to tell the story of Breath of the Wild, how can this not be canon? Some aspects of the gameplay might not be, but I mean, come on. There's no way that it's not. Which for theorists like me is really, really good news. There's a lot more material coming. And also, another question that most people had immediately, myself included, is this Breath of the Wild 2? The answer of which is no, absolutely not. Again, Aonuma states that they are currently in development of Breath of the Wild 2 and we have no news on it currently. Just an update that development is still happening, which is good that he even said that because some Nintendo fans were beginning to lose faith. But I digress. This is a Breath of the Wild 1.5, if you will. It's kind of a prequel to Breath of the Wild, and when the sequel comes out, Breath of the Wild will be the first ever Zelda trilogy. So guys, there's plenty to be excited about, and if you want other people to be excited, please drop a like on this video to get it spread around so that the hype can keep building and spreading. Enough with this Nintendo negativity. It's time to bring on the good times. And also guys, I got a bunch of Breath of the Wild theories on the channel if you want to check those out and we can kind of see if some of them come true when the game releases. Be sure to subscribe to stick around for a lot of the coverage of this game and everything Nintendo. And that's all I got for you guys. I'm off to go watch this trailer about 100 more times, and I'm sure some of you are going to do the same. This is MaskedNintendoBandit signing out. Keep the hype real. Peace.